I spent my whole life saving money to leave for my son, and he left me in a nursing home, like I was an old burden too heavy to carry. That was the phrase I repeated most in the silence of that cold room, smelling of disinfectant. I thought I was being cared for. I thought my son was on my side, managing my social security, protecting me. But the truth is, while I trusted, he planned. While I smiled with gratitude, he smiled with contempt. I only understood everything when I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine, surrounded by strangers. And the nurse told me, "Your son signed the papers yesterday, Mr. Harrison. Now you stay here with us." It didn't click right away. It took me days to understand that this wasn't a temporary place. Like he had said, it was my new destiny. It was where he had left me to forget. But before I continue this story, tell me where you're listening from. Comment down below and follow the channel because every day there's a story that maybe you need to hear, too. My name is Reuben Harrison. I'm 81 years old. And what I don't lack is stories. I was born in a small town in rural Tennessee. Back when children were born at home, the midwife came on a bicycle, and we used oil lamps to light the night. I grew up on the farm, helping my father plant corn and soybeans, waking up before the sun and sleeping to the sound of crickets. I got my first pair of work boots when I was 16, when I went to work in a warehouse, stacking sacks of grain on my back. Then I went to the big city to try my luck in Detroit. I went through many places. I was a loader, construction helper, night watchman until I got a job as a fare collector on a bus company, and from there ended up in the cab of a truck. Oh, how I loved the road. I traveled this country from end to end, from Florida to Washington, from California to Maine, carrying cargo, delivering dreams, and returning home with a heavy heart but always full of hope. It was at the window of a boarding house in a small Ohio town that I first saw Evelyn. She was sweeping the sidewalk with a scarf on her head and her skirt brushing her ankles. She looked at me sideways and then smiled. That smile held me for 45 years. We married in 4 months. She was sweet, patient, the type who spoke softly and solved everything with a look. When we lost our 2 daughters, one at 3 months and another before birth, she held my hand and said, "God will give us what we need." And he did. Thomas was born strong, beautiful, with her face and a bit of my temperament. He was my pride. I'd come back from the road. He'd come running, climb on my lap, and ask about everything. He wanted to know about the cities, the cargo, the stories. I promised that everything I did would be for him. And I kept that promise. I saved every penny I could. We didn't have luxury at home, but nothing was ever lacking. We lived in a simple neighborhood in Nashville, in a small 2-story house that I fixed up myself on weekends. I gave Thomas an education, bought uniforms, books, lunch money. When he wanted to go to college for business administration, I worked overtime. I took longer hauls. He grew up, graduated, passed a test for a bank job. It was one of the happiest days of my life. He looked elegant, speaking properly with a future ahead of him. And there I was just watching, thinking it was all worth it. After Evelyn passed away, everything changed. The house became too big, too quiet. I didn't want to bother anyone. We elderly start to feel that way, like we're taking up space. Thomas would come by once in a while, always in a hurry, saying he was swamped with work. He never stopped to sit on the porch with me, have a coffee, listen to a story. But I understood it's the rush of the modern world. When he suggested taking care of my finances, saying I could rest, that he would take care of everything, I saw it as a beautiful gesture. He took my social security card, then came with some papers saying it was to make things easier that I should sign there. I signed. He was my son. The changes were gradual. First, he started selling some things from the house. He said it was to exchange for new things. The television disappeared. Then the old refrigerator. He said it was all to help me. Even my radio disappeared. Evelyn's radio, which played old hymns early in the morning. One day he said the neighborhood was getting dangerous, that it wasn't good for me to stay there alone. And then he talked about a good place, clean with trained people, good food, 24-hour care, a place that would be better for me. He said it with such affection that I even cried. He took me by car, saying he would be with me until the end. When we got there, he helped me upstairs, settled me in the room, and left. He never came back. I spent the first days trying to understand. It must be for a short time, I thought, but then I started asking for my card, my documents, my bank statement. Nobody gave me anything. The staff said everything was the responsibility of the legal guardian, and the guardian was Thomas. The food came on the plate tasteless. The nights were long with moans from other elderly people in the hallways. The silence was a scream. I felt buried alive. One day, a younger nurse with a heart still beating differently sat next to me and asked, "Mr. Harrison, why are you here? Don't you have anyone?" I answered with a low voice, almost breathless. "I have a son, but I think he doesn't have me anymore." It was that conversation that awakened me, because there I realized I was still alive. That if I wanted, there was still time to do something. I planned for days to get out of there. I discovered that one of the residents left with a brother on weekends. I asked him to deliver a letter I had written by hand with trembling letters. But with truth, I sent it to an old friend from the road, Walter, whom I hadn't seen in years, and the old man came. He arrived by surprise on a Thursday morning with that crooked straw hat and the face of someone who never forgets a debt of friendship. He took me out of there, took me straight to the bank, and what I saw destroyed me. The account I had built for over 45 years was empty. Thomas had transferred everything, bought a car, traveled, renovated the house, and my name wasn't even remembered. At that moment, something died inside me, but something else was born. I requested the blocking of all cards, passwords, and power of attorney. And that same day, I sat on a park bench and cried, but not from sadness. I cried from disappointment and relief, because finally I had awakened, and now my story was going to start again. So listen to the end, and if this story moves you, comment where you're listening from and follow the channel. Every day there's a new story that maybe you too need to hear. I can't explain exactly what happens inside a father's chest when he discovers he's been betrayed by his own son. But I can guarantee you, it's not just sadness. It's a bitter mixture of shame, disappointment, regret, and anger at yourself for believing so much. I left that bank with my shoulders down, walking slowly, feeling like each step weighed 100 pounds. The manager looked at me with a look of pity that hurt me more than any words. She spoke softly, as if I were a child. "Mr. Harrison, there's almost nothing left. All the transactions were made with the registered power of attorney. Legally, he had the right." And there I stood, with my hand trembling on the armrest, trying to understand how a paper with my signature had been the key to erasing me from my own life. Walter, my road friend, took me to his house that day. He lives in a simple neighborhood in Knoxville, one of those where everyone knows everyone. His wife, Mrs., Clara made strong coffee and put it on the table with bread, cheese, and silence. She didn't ask anything. She just looked at me with respect. Walter let me sit in the hammock and said, "Stay here as long as you need. Here you have a roof, food, and a name." That touched me more than if he had cried, because sometimes our dignity fits in a few words. That night, lying in the back room, dark, smelling of old wood, I kept looking at the ceiling for hours and started talking to myself quietly, as if I were apologizing to myself. "Reuben, where did you lose yourself? When did you become a burden? Would it have been better to have died before Evelyn?" It was at that point that I felt the tears falling. But I didn't cry just from pain. I cried because I realized something cruel. My son didn't love me anymore. Or maybe he never had. Maybe he loved the idea of the strong, hard-working, providing father, but the old, retired, lonely man, that one was no longer useful. I stayed quiet for 4 days, only leaving the room to eat. Walter respected my time, but on the 5th day he came in, sat next to me, and said, "Let's solve things. Reuben, you're not a man to give up." And I nodded because he was right. I had always been one to get up, shake off the dust, and move on. I had already broken a truck axle in the middle of the mountains. I had been sick in a city that didn't even have a gas station. I had lost everything and started over. So why would now be different? I decided then to seek help. We went to a public defender in the city. I told everything. I showed the bank statement, the transfers, the power of attorney, the nursing home records. The lawyer listened, took notes, took a deep breath, and said, "Mr. Harrison, unfortunately, legally, he acted within his rights, but morally he committed a cruelty." And then he gave me advice. "Do you still have an active Social Security number? Are you still the owner of your name? Let's do what we can to recover what we can. But above that, let's recover you." Those words gave me a jolt because I had stopped being someone for a long time. I had become just Thomas's father, Evelyn's widower, the retiree who depended on others. And there I began to remember who I was. Reuben, the man of the road, the one who never let go of the wheel, who knew how to make coffee in a can, who had helped the injured trucker, who had slept hungry but didn't let his son go without. That guy still existed. I started organizing my life. I blocked all access, went to the notary to revoke the power of attorney. I opened a new bank account. I requested a complete statement for the last 6 years. The lawyer advised that I could try a lawsuit for breach of trust and moral damages. But more than that, I wanted Thomas to know that I was alive, that I had returned, and that he would no longer decide for me. Going back to my old house wasn't possible. I discovered he had already sold it. The deed had been transferred to the name of Laura, the woman he was living with. And you know what's worse, they didn't even tell me. They just erased my history from that place. No photo of mine remained, not even Evelyn's rocking chair. That's when I made the most difficult decision to start from scratch. I went looking for a temporary shelter from the city hall, but Walter wouldn't let me. He said that as long as he breathed, I had a home. I stayed in a small room at the back of his house, which used to serve as storage. I swept, cleaned, tidied, put a small mattress on the floor and made that my new world. A small space, but all mine. And there, in the silence of the nights, I began to write. I took an old notebook and started recording everything. The story of my life. From childhood on the farm through road adventures to the day my own blood abandoned me. Writing became my therapy. It was like I was sewing back together the pieces of me that had been torn. I remembered stories I didn't even know were still stored. The day I was almost robbed on a highway in Alabama and was saved by a dog. The blind boy I helped cross the city by bus even though I was late. The night I slept on the shoulder hugging a photo of Evelyn, afraid I wouldn't make it home. All of that now made sense. I wasn't just the betrayed father. I was a whole man with a past, with history, with value. Meanwhile, I received a call from the bank. A new younger manager had seen my case and was moved. She said they were opening a program for elderly victims of financial abuse. She wanted me to participate as a volunteer counselor. At first, I froze. I didn't know if I could speak to others, but I accepted. And at the first meeting, I met 4 gentlemen and 3 ladies who had gone through similar things. One of them cried, saying his grandson took everything from him. And I understood it wasn't just me. There were many people hurt, silent, forgotten. It was at that meeting that I realized my pain, as heavy as it was, could become a bridge for others to cross. And I decided I would no longer be silent. Thomas would no longer be the last page of my story. And it was when I was beginning to accept this new beginning that the unexpected happened. They rang the doorbell at Walter's house on a Friday morning, and when I went to answer, still with the coffee cup in my hand, I saw on the other side of the gate a face I never expected to see there. The expression was different, but the look, that one I knew very well. It was him, my son Thomas, standing on the other side of Walter's gate. He wore a light dress shirt, wrinkled, and his eyes weren't the same ones that looked at me with pride when he passed college, nor the same ones that laughed when I came back from the road with a cheap gift. They were low eyes, restless, like someone carrying weight. For a few seconds, I just stood there holding the coffee cup by the handle, feeling the heat rise from the ceramic to my hand, trying to understand if it was really real. The silence between us was louder than any scream. He moved his lips first. "Dad, and stopped as if his throat had locked with his own shame. I took a deep breath, didn't open the gate, didn't advance, didn't shout, just looked. Because at that moment, I didn't know what to do with everything I felt. It was as if inside me there was a dam about to burst. But the floodgates had jammed. Anger, hurt, longing, father's instinct, childhood memories, all mixed up. Thomas raised his eyes and said, "I found out that you left the nursing home, that you went to the bank, that you blocked me." He said this like someone complaining about an injustice, and that hit me like a stone in the stomach. The lack of awareness, the absence of repentance, as if I had done something wrong by protecting myself. "What did you come here to do?" "Thomas," I asked firmly, without beating around the bush, "do you want to see me or do you want to know if there's anything left?" He was disconcerted, scratched his neck, looked at the ground. I just wanted to talk. That's all." His voice was that of someone who no longer knew where they stood. I still hesitated for a moment, but I opened the gate. Not for him, but for me, because I needed to listen. I needed to look into his eyes and confirm if the boy I raised still existed there or if he had really died. We sat on the porch bench, me on one side, him on the other. Walter watched from a distance in silence, leaning against the doorframe. Thomas started talking fast, like someone who wanted to finish quickly. "Dad, I know I was wrong. I know I messed up. But life got tight. Laura pressured me. The bills piled up. I thought I could balance it out later, pay it back gradually. I swear it wasn't out of malice. I remained silent, looking ahead, listening to every word, like someone listening to a radio with interference. More noise than truth. Do you remember the last time we sat like this? Thomas, I asked. He frowned. It was in the backyard at home. I had made coffee. You said you were going to help me, that it was time to rest. You promised me you would take care of my social security, my house, my things, and I believed you. Do you know why he shook his head like someone who didn't want to answer? But I continued, because I always took care of you from the day you were born. And there wasn't a single moment, not a single second, when I thought about leaving you. He lowered his head. Dad, I was lost. I was tired. I grew up watching you work like a pack mule, and I didn't want that for me. When I saw all that money, I felt I deserved it. That it was like payment for all the years I felt trapped in that house. That cut me in a way I can't describe. Payment, I repeated. You thought my social security was payment for raising you, for loving you, for staying up nights waiting for you to come home from parties, for selling my truck to pay for your college. He didn't answer, remained silent. And in that silence, I felt that nothing mattered anymore, that it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a worldview. Thomas looked at me and saw debt. I looked at him and saw a love that never asked for return. And that difference was an impossible abyss to cross. I got up slowly with my hands on my knees and said, You don't need to pretend anymore. Thomas, I'm no longer your burden, nor am I your emergency fund. I'm a man, a father, and maybe now finally free. He tried to hold my arm. Dad, wait. I'm sorry. I came here because I dreamed about Mom. She was angry. She said I was becoming a man she wouldn't recognize. For a moment, Evelyn's name shook something inside me. Her memory always touched me like a distant bell, and I even imagined her saying that with her arms crossed with that calm and serious look. But even so, I didn't give in, because forgiveness isn't forgetting, and repentance without change is just theater. I also dream about your mother, Thomas, and in all dreams she hugs me, protects me, treats me as she always did, with love, and I know she would never have accepted what you did. He nodded silently. The sun hid his face, revealing marks of tiredness, maybe from sleepless nights, but my heart was no longer moved by appearances. I learned the hard way that it's not because a person cries that they're sorry. We stayed there a few more minutes. He asked to come back another day. He said he wanted to try to rebuild things. I didn't promise anything. I just said that now I was the one who decided, and that for the first time in a long time, I was going to choose for myself. After he left, I went back to my room. I closed the door slowly, sat on the bed, and stayed there looking at the wooden ceiling. And for the first time since I left the nursing home, I felt peace. Not because the wounds had healed, but because I had finally put everything in its place. And even if it still hurt, it hurt in a different way. Like someone who had already learned to live with the scar. That night, I wrote in my notebook, Today, my son visited me. He came to say he dreamed about Mom, but maybe it was heaven giving him one last warning. I don't know if we'll truly meet again, but I know that now at least I found myself again. And it was there, with the pen in my hand and my soul less heavy, that I began to understand that sometimes forgiveness begins when we stop expecting repentance and simply free ourselves from the need to be loved by those who don't know how to love. After that day, life returned to silence. Thomas didn't call, didn't send messages, didn't show up again. And to be quite honest, I didn't expect him to either. There was nothing I wanted to hear anymore. His visit had left a bitter taste in my mouth and a strange emptiness in my chest, as if a part of me had been torn out for good. But at the same time, as if another part had returned to its place. I couldn't explain it. But it was as if I had finally understood that a father's love also has limits, and when it goes beyond the point, it becomes a wound. In those days, time seemed slower. I woke up early as I always did my whole life. The habit of someone who spent decades hitting the road at dawn never leaves the body. I would get up, make strong coffee, sit on the little stool in the back, and watch the sky clear. It was at that moment that I talked to myself or to God, or maybe to Evelyn. Not out loud, but with my heart. And every morning I repeated the same question. And now, Reuben, what does life want from you? It was on one of those mornings, while I was sweeping the yard with a crooked palm broom, that I found a small cardboard box among some of Walter's old things. It was there, kind of hidden, covered with dust. When I opened it, I saw it was mine. I had left it when moving from the old house and didn't even remember anymore. Inside were old photos, newspaper clippings, a shirt from my youth team, and a letter from Evelyn. That broke me down. I sat on the floor with the box on my lap and began to review each piece of the past, like someone holding their own soul in their hands. The letter was old from when I still traveled far. Her handwriting was small, round, smelling like dried flowers. She said, "My love, take care of yourself. Thomas and I wait for you every night with longing and prayer. Remember, everything we do with love comes back, and when the world seems too unfair, remember that God doesn't forget the righteous." I closed my eyes for a moment, and it seemed like she was there, sitting next to me. I felt a crazy urge to hear her voice one more time, to say that I failed, that I was foolish, that I believed too much, that I let our son erase us. But at the same time, reading those words, I understood that she already knew that maybe even back then, she already felt that life would charge us a price. I went back to writing more frequently, in my notebook, which was now almost full. I began to tell stories I had never told anyone, like the time I took a load of lumber to Oregon and was stuck for 4 days on a flooded road, or the night a boy asked for a ride at the gas station, and I gave it. Only later I discovered he had run away from home, or the woman I helped at a roadside clinic when the ambulance didn't come, and who wrote me a letter years later thanking me for saving her son. None of these stories Thomas knew because he never wanted to listen. And that hurt because I always wanted him to be proud of me, not for what I had, but for who I was. Walter said that writing was my way of staying alive. And maybe he was right, because the more I wrote, the more I remembered that my life didn't start with abandonment, nor did it end there. I had an entire trajectory before that. A story with value, with struggle, with dedication, and no ungrateful son could erase that. It was on one of those afternoons near the end of October that I received an unexpected visit. Walter's granddaughter, a girl about 19 years old, knocked on my room door, shy, with a notebook in her hand. She said, "Mr. Harrison, can you help me with the school essay? It's about life memories." I smiled a crooked smile and said, "Come in." She sat down, opened the notebook, and started writing down everything I said. And suddenly, I found myself telling things that had been stored for decades. I talked about my father who died early, my mother who washed clothes for others, the toys I made myself with pieces of wood and rope, the first falls, the first dreams. When I finished, she had tears in her eyes and said, "You should record these stories. Put them on the internet. There are people who need to hear this." That stuck in my head. I was never good with technology. My cell phone was simple, one of those with buttons. But that idea stirred me because I realized that maybe even after everything, I could still leave a legacy. Not in money, not in inheritance, but in words, in truth. I started recording some audios on Walter's old recorder. I told a piece of my life each day. Then he transferred it to the computer and sent it to some acquaintances who had story channels. One of them responded saying he wanted to publish it. And so, without expecting it, my words began to reach the world. I received letters, many from people saying they heard my story and saw themselves in it. Elderly people who were also left behind. Women who took care of their parents alone. Grandchildren asking for forgiveness. One of them wrote, "Mr. Harrison, my grandfather died without knowing I admired him. Thank you for teaching me in time." That gave me a lump in my throat, because I understood that sometimes what we live through serves to heal others. But that same month, other news reached me, and this one affected me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Thomas had been fired from the bank, accused of suspicious transactions. Laura had left, taking what little remained, and he had gone back to living in a borrowed little room. Someone who knew him ran into Walter and told him like someone who didn't want anything. And that news felt like a stone in the calm water of my heart. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel joy. I felt pity. And at the same time, a strange confirmation. Because life, even when it takes time, collects its debts. And sometimes heaven's answer isn't punishment. It's just justice. I spent days thinking about whether I should look for him, whether I should extend my hand. But deep down, a voice inside me said, "Let him walk the path he chose." And I obeyed. That night I went to bed earlier, and before closing my eyes, I spoke quietly. "Evelyn, he's paying for what he did, and I'm here firm, missing you, but at peace." And it was the first time in a long time that I slept without dreaming of pain. Time passed faster than I imagined. When I saw it, it was already January, and at that year end, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone. I didn't buy fruitcake, didn't set aside gifts, didn't leave the radio on Christmas night. I stayed in my corner, in my room, arranged with care, and did what my heart asked. Silence, because there's pain that only gets better when we stop pretending it's gone. But even without making plans, something different began to stir inside me. It was as if that open wound had begun to heal slowly without warning. And in the middle of all that silence, an envelope arrived. The mailman called, delivered it to Walter, who passed it to me at coffee time. It was simple, no return address, no mark. I opened it carefully, suspiciously, and inside was a folded notebook page. The handwriting was familiar, but kind of shaky, like someone who no longer knew very well how to ask for forgiveness. It was from Thomas. He wrote a few lines. He said he had lost his job, that Laura had left, that he was living as a favor in a borrowed little room, and that despite everything, he was remembering me every day. At the end, he wrote, "Dad, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry and that now I understand." I closed the envelope calmly and left it beside the table. I stayed looking at it there for a while, not knowing if that was an emotional trap or a real opening. The truth is that when someone steps on your heart the way he stepped on mine, even repentance seems dangerous. and I didn't want to fool myself again. But also, something inside me didn't want to carry hate because hate weighs, and I was already too old to carry more than necessary. I spent days thinking about what to do. I didn't write back, didn't call, but I also didn't tear up the letter. And one afternoon, sitting in the square in front of the town church, I caught myself watching a father pushing a baby stroller. He laughed, talked to the child as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And that took me back. I remembered the day Thomas learned to ride a bicycle. I ran after him, shouting, "Hold tight, son." And when he let go of the handlebars and pedaled alone, I cried with pride. That didn't disappear. That existed. And then I understood that his mistake didn't erase everything that came before. That the man he became might have destroyed me, but the boy he was still lived in some corner of my memory. And maybe it was with that boy that I still had some emotional debt. Not money, not inheritance, but closure. That's when I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. Go to the cemetery. I took an old bus and went to visit Evelyn's grave. I brought a simple flower, one of those sold at the farmer's market. When I got there, I sat next to the cold stone and talked. I talked about everything: the betrayal, the pain, the abandonment, the letter. I said I felt lost even having found myself and that I didn't know if I should forgive, if I should seek, or if I should just continue. And it was there on that cement bench looking at the gray evening sky that I felt the answer. It didn't come as a voice, nor as a sign, but as a gentle memory of Evelyn saying, "You always knew when to stop the truck and when to keep going." I returned home with a light heart, and that night I opened my notebook and wrote a letter. It was short, without resentment, without anger, just truth. I wrote, "Thomas, I received your letter. I read it with a father's heart, but I respond with a man's soul. I won't erase what happened, but I also won't carry resentment. I hope you learn that you transform yourself and that you treat others better than you treated me. Forgiveness you have, trust that will take time." I signed with my firm handwriting, put it in the envelope, and asked Walter to mail it. After that, I didn't think about the matter anymore. I returned to my routine, to the audios I recorded, to the notes I received, to the silence of mornings with coffee. But something inside me had already changed. It was no longer pain that commanded. It was conscience. I knew I had done what I could, and from then on, what Thomas did was no longer my problem. A few weeks passed. One morning, while I was sweeping the yard, I heard a familiar voice across the street. It was Walter's granddaughter running with her cell phone in her hand. "Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison. You're on the internet again. There are people saying they want to turn your story into a book." I stood there, not understanding. I took the cell phone and saw that a big channel had reposted one of my audios. Hundreds of comments. People from all over the country saying my story was the same as many people's. And there, reading that, I realized I had become a voice for those who never had one. The life I led, the pain I hid, was now helping other people heal theirs. And that was worth more than any money Thomas had stolen. That afternoon, I sat under the yard tree, took a blank sheet, and started writing another letter. But this time, it wasn't for Thomas. It was for me. I started like this. "Reuben, you survived. You survived the road, the pain, the loneliness, the abandonment. And even when they tried to bury you alive, you flourished." And I continued writing like someone thanking for strength, for faith, for the courage to continue. Because in the end, what hurts most isn't betrayal. It's the silence that comes after. But when we fill that silence with truth, with memory, with purpose, it becomes something else. It becomes healing. And that night before sleeping, I closed the notebook, looked at the room's ceiling, and thought, the story isn't over yet. But now it's in my hands. Life has these things. When we think everything has been said, that there are no more curves in the road, it comes and changes direction. I was already certain that my role with Thomas had ended. I thought that last letter was my period, my emotional farewell. But it seems life still wanted to teach me one more thing, because what happened next, I never expected. One Monday morning, the sun had barely risen. I was sitting on the porch having my black coffee when Walter approached with an envelope in his hand. "This came for you," he said with a somewhat suspicious look. I took it, recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Thomas. This time the envelope came with different content. Along with the letter was a photo, an old photo. The three of us, me, Evelyn, and Thomas, still small, sitting on my lap holding a toy truck. The photo was carefully folded, and on the back he wrote, "Dad, I found this photo inside one of Mom's old Bibles. I don't know why, but when I looked at it, I cried." The letter was short. It said he was living as a favor with a bank colleague, that he had almost nothing left, that he was starting to work as a delivery driver. It said that every day before leaving. He looked at that photo and missed when everything was simple. At the end, he wrote, "If someday you think we can have a coffee and talk, I'm still here." I read that slowly. I didn't cry, but I wasn't indifferent either. I kept the photo in the drawer with other memories and left the letter on the table. I spent the whole day with that on my mind, because despite everything he did, despite how much he hurt me, I still remembered that barefoot boy running in the yard, that scared look on the first day of school, that "I love you, Dad," said with sincerity before sleeping. I knew that boy still existed in some corner of his soul, but I also knew that the man he became needed to face the consequences. In the days that followed, I returned to my routine. I continued recording my audios, helping Walter's granddaughter with school texts, answering letters that came from all over the country, people telling how the story had helped heal old hurts. A man wrote saying he called his father after 25 years of silence. A young woman said she visited her grandmother for the first time after hearing my voice. That gave me strength, because I realized that even without wanting to, my pain was becoming a bridge for other people to cross their own abysses. But even with all that, the image of Thomas in that photo wouldn't leave my head. I tried to focus on the good things, but at night, lying in the dark, it came back. It made me think if I hadn't let resentment grow too much, if what I called peace wasn't just a wall to avoid getting hurt again. And it was on one of those nights that I dreamed of Evelyn. A clear dream, as if it were real. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap and a firm look. She said, "You don't need to forget what he did, but you need to decide if you're going to carry this until the end of your life." I woke up sweating and with a strange certainty in my chest. The next day, I went out early. I went to a simple bakery near the neighborhood where Thomas said he was staying. I asked discreetly about him. A young man recognized the name, said he made deliveries around there. I waited. I sat on a bench in the square across from it like someone who doesn't want anything. After about 50 minutes, I saw him passing with his backpack, helmet in hand, sweaty with a tired face. He didn't see me. And at that moment, looking at him like that, I saw something else. I saw a man on the ground, not just for what he lost, but for everything he didn't learn. And I understood that maybe he needed me more now than ever. I didn't call him that day. I went back home, took the photo back, sat on the porch, and kept looking at it. I remembered the promise I made to Evelyn when she was in the hospital right at the very end. She held my hand and said, "Reuben, if someday I go first, take care of our boy, even if he makes mistakes." At the time, I didn't even understand what she meant. Today I understand, because a mother's love sees further. 3 days later, I wrote a simple note. "If you want to have a coffee, meet me at the Square Bakery, Sunday at 10. I signed just with the initial. I asked a boy from the neighborhood to deliver it to him, and waited. Sunday came. I arrived early. I ordered 2 toasted breads and 2 coffees. I sat at the corner table near the window. The clock struck 10, 10:15, 10:30. I was already preparing to get up when I saw him enter slowly. Dejected face, simple clothes. When he saw me, he stopped at the door. His eyes shone for a second, but then he lowered his head. He came to the table and sat without saying anything. The silence weighed for a few seconds. Then he said, "Thank you for calling me." And I replied, "I didn't call to talk about the past. I just wanted to know how you are." The conversation was brief. I asked about work. He told me he was delivering food, learning to live with little. He said he now knew the value of each dollar, that he wasn't expecting anything, but that the letter I sent had been a relief. It was like you had taken a weight off my shoulders, not by forgiving me, but by saying I needed to change. We finished the coffee in silence. When it was time to leave, he got up and said, "Dad, even if you never want to see me again, I understand. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better than I was." And he left. I didn't hug, didn't promise anything, but I felt something had changed. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a new beginning. It was just a point of peace. That day I went home light, sat in my corner, took the notebook, and wrote. Sometimes the greatest proof of love is letting the other face their own shadows. And sometimes forgiveness isn't a hug. It's just the silence we choose not to fill with resentment. And it was in that silence that I truly began to heal. The days settled like pieces of an old puzzle, where some parts were too worn to fit again, but others unexpectedly found their place. The routine returned to what it was. Black coffee early, chair in the yard, a notebook on my lap, and silence. But it was a different silence now. It wasn't that silence of absence of someone who was left behind. It was the silence of someone who no longer needs to scream inside. Something had changed in me. It wasn't full forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. But it was as if the hurt had also aged and no longer screamed so much. Thomas didn't look for me anymore after that coffee, and I didn't go after him either. It was as if that meeting had been a silent settling of accounts, each one understanding their place in the world from then on. I realized with more clarity that it wasn't my function to fix him, nor to try to recover what wouldn't come back. My function now was to take care of what was left of me, and it was in that spirit that I began to approach something I had long avoided, the idea of future, because for a long time I lived only on memories. First of the road, then of Evelyn, then of the boy who grew up, then of what was taken from me. I lived going back in time like someone rewriting letters that will never be sent. But that month, something lit up inside here. It wasn't a big light, nor sudden. It was just a click, like a door that opens slowly, letting a beam of hope enter. And that beam came in an unexpected visit from Walter's granddaughter. She arrived one late afternoon, excited with a flyer in her hand. Mr. Harrison, the school is going to have a story fair. Students are going to tell tales, memories, and I really wanted you to participate telling yours. I smiled. I found it funny. Me in a school. I'm past the age, my dear. And she, with that stubborn way of someone who still believes in things, answered, "That's exactly why nobody has more stories than you." I kept that in my head. In the following days, every time I opened the notebook, I started rereading the texts with a different look. They were no longer just venting. They were portraits of an era, testimonies of someone who lived a lot and maybe could serve more people besides me. I accepted the invitation. On the day of the fair, they arranged a simple chair for me in the middle of the court. There were about 50 people sitting. Young people, teachers, some parents. They gave me a small microphone, one of those you clip on your shirt. I was shaking inside, but when I started talking, the nervousness went away. I talked about childhood on the farm, the battery radio, the road, missing Evelyn, the day I found myself trapped in the nursing home. I talked about disappointment, but also about what I learned. And when I finished, what I heard was silence, a good silence, full of respect. Then came the applause. But what touched me most was a girl who approached with tearful eyes and said, "Mr. Harrison, my father left me when I was little. I always thought I was worthless. But listening to you, I understood that sometimes the pain we carry isn't our fault, and that even so, we can be someone good." That broke me down inside because I realized that in the end, my story, so full of losses, was serving to give meaning to others' pain. The following week, I received an invitation from the school itself. They wanted me to come back from time to tell more. They said many students had been moved, that my talk had provoked discussions about family, respect, care for the elderly. I accepted not out of vanity, but because I felt useful again, and that for someone who was treated as a burden is like getting a second life, being listened to again, being looked in the eyes. Walter laughed. He said I was becoming a school celebrity, but deep down I knew he was proud. He and Clara were the only people who extended their hand to me when the world kicked me, and I never forgot that. One day, sitting with him on the porch having coffee with a somewhat cloudy sky, he asked me, "So, Reuben, do you think you really forgave your son?" I took a deep breath, looked at the yard, and replied, "I think I forgave what hurt in me. What he's going to do with that is no longer up to me. Because forgiveness for me isn't saying everything's okay. It's not forgetting. It's just stopping carrying on my shoulders what was someone else's choice. It's recognizing the wound, treating it, and moving on, even if it still bleeds from time to time." And I continued with my audios, my texts, my visits to school, with my solitary coffee, and my quiet longing for Evelyn. One late afternoon coming back from school, Walter's granddaughter handed me a printed sheet. It was a letter someone had left at reception. No name, no return address. It just said, "You don't know me, but I know you. Your story prevented me from doing something stupid. Thank you for existing." And at that moment, I understood that my voice was going farther than my feet could reach. That night, I wrote a new phrase in my notebook. Even those who were thrown away can still be shelter for someone. And that phrase stayed in my head until I fell asleep. Life has been teaching me slowly, without hurry, that pain doesn't disappear, but changes form and sometimes transforms into a seed. And we don't even realize we're planting until we start to see flowers. That month, something began to change in the air. It wasn't just the climate getting drier, nor the sky gaining a clearer tone in the mornings. It was as if my body had begun to accept a new season inside. 2. A time where absence no longer hurt so much, where silence no longer hurt, and where my son's name was no longer an open wound, but just a quiet scar that itched from time to time. I continued with my routine, wrote, recorded my audios, went to school when they called me, and always came back with a fuller heart than the day before. It was strange to say, but for the first time in many years, I was feeling part of something. Life that had pushed me to a forgotten corner now seemed to pull me back to the middle of the circle. People came to me, sat to listen, called me Mr. Harrison, with that tone that mixes respect with affection. And I, who before thought I had already lived everything there was to live, began to understand that maybe the best days aren't the ones that rush by, but the ones we feel slowly. It was on one of those slow afternoons that something happened that I didn't expect. I was sitting in the square in front of the church, with my notebook open on my lap and a pencil in my hand, jotting down loose ideas, when I heard someone call my name softly, Mr. Harrison. I looked up, and there, with a delivery uniform and a thermal bag hanging from his shoulder, was Thomas, thinner, hair grown out, unshaven, tired face. But without that arrogance he carried before, I kept looking at him for a few seconds. I didn't get up, didn't smile. I just waited. Sorry to show up like this, Dad, but I heard you usually stay around here. And I thought, I don't know. He scratched his neck awkwardly and took a step back, as if he were ready to leave in case I didn't say anything. You can sit, I said. And he obeyed slowly, like someone who still doesn't know if they have the right to be there. He sat on the concrete bench about 3 feet away from me. We were silent for a while. You could only hear a bird singing and the noise of cars passing on the street. I'm working all day making deliveries, sometimes more than 13 hours. But at least now I sleep in peace, he said without looking at me. I'm trying to fix what I can. I remained silent because I had learned that not every silence is absence. Sometimes it's just maturity. He continued. I wanted to know if you would let me help. Not with money. I don't have any. But with whatever. I could take you places or help you with school papers or just be around. That request didn't surprise me. In some corner of me, I already expected this moment to come, but hearing it was different. I closed the notebook calmly, looked ahead, took a deep breath, and answered with a firm voice. I don't need you to do anything for me, Thomas. What I needed you already didn't give me. And everything I am today is because I learned to be alone. He lowered his head. I continued. But if you want to be around, you'll have to learn to listen. You'll have to know that you won't always be welcome. That trust is glass that doesn't glue back together. But also that I'm your father, and that even though I've distanced myself, I didn't die inside. He nodded without saying anything. We stayed there a while longer. Before leaving, he put his hand in his pocket, took out a crumpled paper, and handed it to me. This is a letter I wrote to Mom. I know she's gone, but I needed to write. If you want, you can read it. I took the folded sheet, kept it in the notebook, and nodded. He got up, adjusted the backpack on his shoulders, and left, walking slowly, like someone carrying more than the body can handle. That night at home, I sat on the bed and opened the paper. It was a simple letter written with blue pen, shaky handwriting, more sincere. He said he was ashamed of the man he had become, that he had let ego, ambition, and fear speak louder than love. He said that now, losing everything, he began to understand the value of things money never bought: respect, time, presence. And he ended like this: Mom, I hope that wherever you are, you can see that I'm trying to go back to being that boy who ran in the yard and said he loved you both. I closed the letter with tearful eyes. I didn't cry, but something inside me moved as if Evelyn's voice had echoed in the room, saying, "He's still our son." And that gave me a tightness in my chest, because it was true. He was. And no matter how much he failed, he was still the fruit of everything we built together. Maybe he didn't deserve my trust back, but he deserved at least a space to try to be someone better. Days passed, and gradually he began to appear. First, just asking if I needed something from the street, then coming to Walter's house to leave fresh bread without saying anything. Another time he brought me a battery radio just like the one Evelyn used to listen to. I found it at a thrift shop. He said, "It works." We didn't talk much, but the silence was no longer the same. It was a silence full of attempt. One day, he asked me to watch a presentation of mine at school. He sat in the back, quiet, wearing a cap. Then he came to tell me, "I didn't know you were so good with words." And I replied, "You never wanted to listen." He lowered his head, smiled slightly, and said, "Yeah, maybe now I'm learning to listen." And so we went slowly, without hurry, without promises, just letting time say if there was still something to rebuild. I no longer had the same need as before. I didn't need him to love me. I didn't expect recognition anymore. But I confess there was a certain relief in seeing him try, a certain comfort in knowing that even after the damage, he still sought a way to find himself again. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Our heart doesn't forget who we were, but it's also capable of learning to live with who we became." And maybe that's the forgiveness that life tries to teach, not erasing the past, but learning to walk over it without falling again. There was one of those ordinary days when the sky dawned half overcast, and the wind blew with that smell of wet earth that only those who have lived in the countryside know. I was on the porch, wrapped in my wool coat, already worn by the years drinking my black coffee, when I noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. I was at peace. It wasn't a peace of someone who has everything in place, nor of someone who solved all life's pending issues. It was a quieter peace that's born when we stopped fighting against what we can't change. I looked at the maple tree leaves swaying in the back of the yard, heard the birds singing in the distance, and thought to myself, that's it. Life goes on even after the fall. That morning, Thomas showed up again. It was no longer a surprise. He had started coming more frequently. Sometimes he brought bread, fruit, some random story. He sat on the same bench, spoke softly, didn't ask much, and I didn't demand anything either. We just shared time, and somehow that shared silence was sowing a new relationship, a way of being together without touching the wounds we already knew existed. He started helping me with trips to school, taking me by motorcycle when the bus was late, waiting for me outside with coffee in hand. Sometimes he listened to my talks hidden, disguising it. I pretended I didn't see. And so, in the interval between what we were and what will never be again, something different was born. Not a complete reconciliation, but a type of sincere presence. It was on one of those trips to school that a teacher came looking for me. A young woman full of energy. She said that the audios I recorded had reached a small book publisher and that they were interested in turning my stories into a memoir book. I was silent at the time. I didn't know whether to laugh, thank, or refuse. She continued, "They heard you talking about the nursing home, about the road, about your wife. They said all that sounds like pure truth. And truth is what's most lacking nowadays." That left me stirred up. I had never thought about a book. My notebooks were just venting. But maybe, I thought, maybe this was the way to eternalize what I lived. Not to let my story die after my body got tired of continuing. I went home thoughtful. I told Walter. He has always laughed with that air of someone who already knew. "See, I told you, Reuben. Your life is a book. It's a movie. It's a lesson." I told Thomas days later. He was silent for a while. Then he said, "Dad, if this really happens, I want to help. Even if it's just typing your notebooks. I want to be part of it." That hit me in a way I didn't expect, because he didn't speak like someone who wants to appear. He spoke like someone who wants to give back, and that I had never heard from his mouth. We then started a new kind of routine. I read the handwritten excerpts. He transferred everything to the computer. Sometimes he stopped, asked, "Dad, did this really happen? You were really stuck on the road for 4 days with the truck overturned?" And I laughed. I said yes, and told the whole story again. Other times he read excerpts about Evelyn and stayed quiet. Once finishing a chapter where I talked about when he was a child, he closed the laptop slowly and said, "Dad, I didn't remember we were happy." I replied, "Because you grew up too fast and forgot too quickly." He nodded with tearful eyes and continued typing. This work between us was creating a bond that I thought would never exist again. It wasn't just an attempt anymore. It was dedication. It was as if finally he was learning to be a son, and I was learning to let the past stay in its place. One day, while he was typing an excerpt about the day he was born, when I ran to tell the neighbors from so much joy, he stopped, looked at me and said, "I don't know if there's still time to be different, but I want to try for me, for you, for Mom." That hurt and healed at the same time, because the truth is that there's no way to go back, but there's a way to continue differently. At the end of that month, the publisher confirmed interest. They said they would publish the reports as they were with small edits without changing the language. They wanted to keep my voice. That moved me more than I imagined, knowing that the words that came out of me on nights of pain, longing, revolt, were now going to become a book. It was as if someone was saying, "Your suffering was worth it. Your life had weight. Your silence wasn't in vain." The day we signed the contract in a small office, smelling of new paper and strong coffee, Thomas stayed by my side the whole time. He didn't say much, but looked at me with a respect I hadn't seen in years. When it was time to leave, he offered me his arm like someone accompanying an elderly father and whispered, "Mom would be proud of you." I looked at him and said, "If she were alive, maybe none of this would have happened." He lowered his eyes. "I know. And that's what hurts me most." We went home in silence, but a silence full of meaning. And that night, I went to bed earlier, took my old notebook almost full, and wrote on the last page, "Today, after everything, I saw myself as I had never seen myself. Not as an old man who was left behind, but as someone who lived enough to be heard. Maybe that's the miracle of old age finally being listened to." and I slept with a calm heart, and the feeling that even if the end came soon, my story was now stored somewhere where no one else could erase it. The day of the book launch came on an ordinary morning without pomp, without fanfare, but with a different light that seemed to come from within. I woke up early as always, made my coffee, sat on the same porch bench where I wrote most of the notebooks that were now on the shelves of a small bookstore in the city center. The sky was clear with that blue that only appears when the air is light, as if even time had decided to be generous with me that day. I put on my best button-up shirt, wore my old shoes, cleaned with care by Walter's granddaughter, and took the cloth bag where I had put my oldest notebook just for precaution. It wasn't vanity. It was gratitude, because that's where it all began. Thomas came to pick me up by motorcycle, but that day we went in a car borrowed from his colleague. He was different, not just in appearance, which remained simple, with short hair and a clean shave, but in his manner. The man who once looked at me like a hindrance now extended his hand with respect. On the way, we spoke little, but we didn't need to speak much. The silence between us was no longer tense. It was mature. He parked in front of the bookstore, opened my door, and when I entered, I saw a scene that froze me inside. There were people, many people, young, old, parents with small children, people holding notebooks, photos, some with tearful eyes. The school teacher came to me, hugged me, and said, "They came to hear you. Mr. Harrison." They came to feel. I stood there for a few seconds with wet eyes, trying to understand at what moment in life all that happened. I, who was left in a nursing home like a burden. I, who was betrayed by the one I loved most. I, who spent nights asking God if I still had any value. Now I was there surrounded by people who saw me, who listened to me, who called me inspiration. I sat in the chair they had prepared for me with a microphone clipped to my shirt collar. I started speaking low, slowly, like someone talking to a grandchild at the end of the afternoon. I told about my childhood, the farm, the road, Evelyn. I told about Thomas, what happened, the pain. I didn't hide anything, but I also didn't accuse, because at that point in life, it's no longer about pointing fingers, but about illuminating paths. I said that life can be cruel, but it can also be just, that sometimes we lose everything to discover what really matters, and that even being betrayed, forgotten, or abandoned, we can still choose to become shelter, voice, support point for others to start over. At the end of the talk, someone in the back asked for Thomas to stand up. I looked at him. He hesitated but stood up. Long applause. That sound filled the place. I saw his eyes shining, not with pride, but with humility. He waved, and at that moment, for the first time in many years, I felt he had returned. Not the cold man who betrayed me, but the boy, the one I pushed on the bicycle, who smiled with missing teeth, who said, "I love you without shame." After the talk, people came to hug me. An elderly lady held my hand and said, "You spoke for me. My daughter left me in a room and never came back. But now I'm not alone anymore." A young man said, "I called my grandfather after 12 years because I heard your story." An older man showed me a photo of his father. "He died last week. I heard you while driving to the wake. You gave me strength not to collapse." And there I stood with tearful eyes, tight heart, feeling that everything, absolutely everything that hurt, was now transforming into something that made sense. We went home at the end of the day. The sun was already setting slowly on the horizon. In the car, Thomas drove silently, but with a small smile at the corner of his mouth. When we arrived, he left me at Walter's house door, but didn't leave immediately. He stayed there, leaning against the hood, like someone who still needed to say something he had kept for a long time. "Dad," he began with a low voice, "I know a book doesn't fix what I did, and that what you lived was real cruelty. But thank you for not letting that define me forever." I took a deep breath. "Thomas, you still have a long road ahead, and I'm already at the end of mine. But if you learned, then it was already worth it." He nodded with tearful eyes and hugged me for the first time in many years. A hug without hurry, without guilt, without debt. Just a hug. That night, alone in my room, I took the book from the bag, leafed through it slowly, touched the cover. The title was simple, "Still Standing," and seeing my name printed, I felt like I was touching Evelyn's hand again, as if she were saying, "You did it. Reuben, you made it." I sat on the bed, opened my last notebook, and wrote what might have been my simplest phrase, but also the truest. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was. And I closed the notebook without hurry because now my story had already been told. Not the way I planned, but the way it needed to be. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on the story in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.